My name's Larry Saltzman, and my wife and I have lived on this property for about 31 years. And we've been involved in building a food forest here and in sustainable activities that promote sustainable living around the Santa Barbara area.
And what do you call a food? What's a food forest?
It's food for, well, let me start again.
I'm going to move my chair slightly.
A fancy word for what a food forest is recombinant ecology, but using just more plain language, it's a forest that's been constructed and managed by humans. It contains plants that are useful for food, medicine, fiber, all sorts of different uses, and it mimics a natural forest with different layers of the forest, from things that grow underground on the surface, low underlying shrubs and bushes, all the way up to upper story trees.
I'm going to wait just a moment for that plane to pass. Will there be a lot of planes? So maybe okay. Well, we'll just continue. Did you plant much of what's here?
Probably between my wife and I, we planted 70–80% of what's here.
And tell me some of what is here and how they interact with each other.
Well, we have a layer of fruit trees. We have a huge variety of fruit. We have about 130 trees on the property.
Wow. How big is the property?
It's a third of an acre.
Wow.
So we really pack it in. There's stone fruit, apples, pears, peaches, nectarines, guavas, all kinds of different things. There's bushes with edible flowers and leaves. There's vegetable garden, herbs. So there's really a huge variety of stuff in here. And there's some things that really are just, I don't want to say they don't have a specific purpose, but they're like for general biomass, where a lot of bulbs and things send their leaves up, grow during the winter, and then die back and leave a lot of good plant waste material that turns into compost and becomes part of the soil.
I know soil is a big issue in a lot of farms. How's your soil, and how do you make sure you have good soil?
Well, when we moved here, this soil was what I called pottery grade clay. It was just so heavy and thick, and you could barely get a shovel in it. And we've just done an enormous amount of mulching. For a long time, I had a really good source of horse manure, and we just heaped organic material on this property and then started planting, and nature took over and did the rest. And so we've had 31 years now of the soil getting much more friable and loose and much easier to grow in than when we first moved here.
Do you have a problem with pests at all? And what do you do about pest management?
We have some problems with pests, but it's really minimal. Insects are not much of a problem because this is such a rich natural environment now that there's plenty of beneficial insects that have come into the property, and between them and lizards and birds, the insects are a very negligible problem. We don't frankly do much about it. We kind of let nature take its course. We have a little bit of rodent problem. We do have to trap rodents. The natural predators are sometimes here at night. We'll get little creatures coming through who will take rodents, but that's really about the only problem we have.
Do you encourage the natural predators to take care of the rodents anyway?
No, we didn't neither encourage nor disencourage. They came. We're about a mile from, no, not even a mile, we're about 2 blocks from Mission Creek, so it's like a nature corridor up into the mountains. So we will get we certainly get local skunks and raccoons, but we get a few weasels and a few other things that do the job.
In your planting, do you plant one type of plant next to another in a certain configuration to make it all work? Or how do you design it?
Well, we do look for plants that will cooperate together, but really in an environment like this where we've introduced plants from all over the world, a lot of this happens, it sort of gets sorted out by itself. Like we have a lot of winter bulbs, and we have winter plants like nasturtium and oxalis, which just sort of establish themselves in here. And what we found they do is they take up nutrients in winter and then die back in the summer when it's drier, but they leave the layer of mulch, and they enrich the soil and protect it from the sun. But we have overstory trees that are good, provide good habitat to grow things up. Like we'll just grow a tomato plant up a tree into the sun. We have various herbs and greens that like a little shade with our strong California sun, and they also grow fine under trees, and other bushes that are just more shade friendly. So it's been layered very carefully in a way. In another way, we've seen what's growing. Nature has told us what likes to grow here and what doesn't. Not everything we plant is a success.
I'm making a documentary about Narciso Torres, who's a master forest gardener. Were you aware of him when he came to Santa Barbara?
Oh yeah, he came and visited this. Narciso came and visited here, which is the second time Annabelle's brought one of her food forester friends to come see this place.
And what was your impression of him?
Impression of him and anybody else I've met from Belize that does food foresting is they're some of the most experienced master gardeners I've ever encountered in my life. They're really amazing people, and they're so intelligent and curious. When they came to visit this garden, Narciso just wandered all over it, asking questions, just peppering me with questions. He had such an understanding of what we were doing here.
Part of what he does, what I understand, is observe to understand how things are working and learn from that. And you were saying you've observed some of that as well here.
Yeah, that's true. Observation is very important. In a way, we got one piece of good advice when we moved here, and we didn't really know a lot when we moved here, which was not to go too fast. So for the first year, we kind of sat and watched this property. We put a few things in, but we didn't just rip it out. What we ended up doing is slowly replacing things we didn't want and keeping that which we wanted. There's still about 20-30% of the plants that were here when we moved in, but we never did a bared earth, scorched earth policy with this place. We watched what will grow, what won't grow, what plants like it, what plants don't like it here. Like we can't grow an avocado on this property, and for a long time I couldn't figure out why they weren't happy here. And then I talked to somebody who knew that they grew avocados here in the 30s, and there was a lot of disease in the ground that was avocado specific from the way they grew back then. Other things, stone fruit just loves to be here. They stick a little twig in the ground, and we've got a nice tree in a few years yielding fruit. So you learn to go with what works and ignore what doesn't.
Well, what lessons have you learned about farming other than what you've told me?
That's a hard question to answer. I'm not sure I quite consider myself a farmer, although this certainly yields a lot of food here. What I've learned is that while no way of growing food is no work, this doing a food forest in some ways, once the forest is established, becomes a lot less work. You have to harvest the fruit, for sure. You have to occasionally do some light pruning of the trees, but you don't have the constant plowing of the ground and turning of the soil and destructive practices that modern agriculture engages in. So this is a much more benign, friendly way to garden or farm.
Yeah, any other thoughts about monoculture farming and whether they could adopt some of what you do?
I was just watching a documentary last night on Holland where they're making food forests as a matter of national policy, and there were aerial shots where you could see a food farm next to monoculture, and it was like looking at the desert next to this rich, lush environment. I mean, one of them was destroying the soil while the food forest was building soil and creating a healthy environment. I mean, look at the things we get here. We're sitting in the shade now in the height of summer and really hot days. It's very pleasant down here, thanks to all the trees and growth. It's always tolerable on the worst days.
How would you say forest farming helps for global warming issues? And I guess one of the things is the coolness.
Yeah, well, done on a larger scale than we've done here, it's possible to reforest areas and change climate. I mean, the climate cools, rain clouds form from the trees, all kinds of amazing things happen, and you don't get the horrible chemical runoffs you do in conventional farming, but which are polluting the world. But trying to think, the buildup of carbon in the soil is done on a more massive scale than we're doing it, is just going to be tremendously useful. I mean, you can see that all the leaves and plant debris that breaks down on the soil and stores carbon right in the soil is really a good thing. Plus, all the trees, I don't know how you quantify it, but every tree is taking up carbon and building wood into its structure.
So, did you say you're a third of an acre?
Yes.
So, on a third of an acre, can you have a significant amount of carbon capturing?
I'm not a scientist, and I have no way of measuring it. I think if you could measure it, what we have growing here on this third of an acre is capturing so much more carbon than you would in a normal neighborhood garden where you have lawn. And a lot of sparsity of plants and open ground. The carbon doesn't go away; it gets soaked up into plants. We have so much biomass on this piece of land that's holding enormous amounts of carbon.
What about water issues?
Well, plants need water through designing water capture into the land, where we've taken what was a hillside of grass, we shaped it into into terraces, and those terraces allow a lot much more water to go in. We have little mini swales and berms that hold water, and the soil itself is like a sponge now. Instead of just rolling off, the soil has so much organic material in it that it soaks water in.
Does it go down to the groundwater table?
I imagine some of it does. You still need some water. I mean, and what you plant really is dependent on the water of your climate. We can get the most out of the amount of water we get compared to planting plants that need a lot of water. Trees generally, unless they're very tropical trees, will get by with less water than like annual flowers. It's just the way it is. They're just water hogs, and we try and not plant water hogs.
Any other thoughts about how you're helping with global warming, climate change?
Well, I think, we're small scale. If you scaled up what we're doing here, people would grow a better percentage of their food at home. The more food you grow at home, the less food is shipped. And we could, if this were done on a regional basis, there'll still be plenty of food for farmers to grow. Nobody's trying to put farmers out of business. There's grains and legumes that are better done at bigger scale by farmers. But so much fruit and annual vegetables can be grown right in a neighborhood. And really one of the benefits then becomes community. There's been a lot of efforts to try and get people to meet and share what they grow, to have a natural trading network grow up in neighborhoods, which gets neighbors knowing neighbors.
Have you done that?
Other people in our neighborhood have organized things like that, and we've eagerly participated and shared in it. We also try and give surplus to the food bank and share it among neighbors and friends.
What type of systems are used for sharing? Do they put it out in front of their house, or?
Various systems are used for sharing. People have put food out in front of their house. They've had weekend meetings. COVID kind of killed it, and I'm hoping it's going to come back. A lot of neighborhoods were once a month having a meeting at somebody's house where people showed up with whatever they were growing, chatted with their neighbors. It was, some of them even became potlucks with food shared. It was really a community builder till COVID came along, and I'm sure we will get it back.
And would they just put their food out there and people would just take what they wanted?
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't even trading where you said, my 3 oranges are worth 2 of your peaches. It was, I have an excess of peaches, take what you need. I could use some oranges, I'll take some of those. It was everybody in the neighborhood sharing, and it was a much better way even than formal trading, which I think would be very difficult to do at this scale.
I think Narciso Torres, the forest gardener, farmer, has said how he also gives away his food and gets it, and it helps his community. And I like how community building is an important issue. I think big corporate farms have kind of wrecked a lot of communities. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think they have wrecked communities. I think they've wrecked farm communities where people don't trade. I was just thinking, we are still trading food, but it's really casual now. I'd given a neighbor some pears who had mentioned to me they really like pears, he and his wife, so I gave him some. And then the other day he knocked on the door with some avocados for me, and we can't, as I said earlier, we've had trouble in this soil growing avocados. So that was great, that was casual. I read an Agatha Christie story, the woman who wrote all the crime stories, and she was describing life in an English village, and though it was a work of fiction, I think it was very accurate, where one woman goes around who makes the best jam and just leaves jars of jam in kitchens of all the people in the village, and other people bring by, one farmer brought by bacon because he had the best bacon in the area, and people were proud of what they grew and happy to share it. I talked to a woman who grew up in a small village in Italy, and she repeated the same story, that in Italy people would take pride in growing the best tomatoes or the best this or the best that, and there was a lot of exchanging going on.
I suppose there's some issues where people want to buy just the cheapest food they can get as long as it looks bright colors or whatever. But perhaps people need to be educated about the value of organic farming and the labor that goes in it. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Collect my thoughts. We've been trained to go for bright colors in foods. We've been trained to go for foods that have chemicals added to them to change the color. We've been trained to go by big corporations to go for all kinds of things that aren't healthy for us but look pretty. And I think they're preying on our primate brain and what looked good in a forest. I mean, I just found out that rice, even organic rice, is often polluted with arsenic. How did arsenic get into rice? In many areas, they raise these massive chicken farm operations, and they feed arsenic to the chickens to make the meat picker. So we ingest arsenic to have pink meat. It's kind of crazy. And that goes on with fruit too. I mean, I think we're coming out of the era where the only apple you could get was Red Delicious, which had been bred. It was healthy actually in that case, but it was tasteless. It had been bred for maximum beauty to the exclusion of taste. And now I notice in the market lots more varieties of healthy, tasty apples are showing up. People are getting interested in the health nutritional quantities of the food they buy. But still, I think it's a problem. We eat so much junk food that mimics real food and just isn't.
Yeah, very true. Do you have any thoughts about indigenous knowledge and how that can be helpful to gardening and farming?
Where we haven't stamped it out, indigenous people had thousands of years of knowledge of growing and living in a given region. It's all specific to where they lived. One of my favorite books is a book called Tending the Wild by a woman who was a professor at UC Davis. She studied how California indigenous people manage the environment in California. And we had 25% of the biodiversity in North America right here in California because of good management practices by indigenous people. They have huge knowledge. They didn't have the big fires we had. They knew how to manage fire. They knew how to manage they weren't farming in the technical sense. They certainly weren't plowing the ground, but they were encouraging plants to be in places where the plants wanted to be. Like if they took chia seeds, an edible seed that they ate, they would sort of scoop it into a basket, but intentionally they were happy that some of the seed fell to the ground and stayed behind, and since it liked growing there, they would get more chia plants going there. We could learn a lot from them, a tremendous amount from them.
And I think that's a good thing about the forest gardener, Narciso, who visited. He has a lot of indigenous knowledge that he tries to pass on.
Oh yeah, it's really important when people like this still have that knowledge to help encourage and support them, and to not go into these areas thinking we know more than they do. We should be going into those areas, if anything, to learn from them, because they're masters of growing in the climate and areas that they live in, and they have thousands of years of experience. I think Annabelle Ford, the archaeologist who brought Narciso up, said that she sees evidence of about 8,000 years of food forestry in the area she's done her work in. Well, that's incredible knowledge base.
For sure. I'm going to pause for a sec.
Do
you know about the Milpa system where Narciso lives? It's a rotation over a 20-year period of trees.
Right. Yeah, the Milpa system is a brilliant way in the right climate and the right ecology to mimic forming a mature forest much faster than it would form in nature. It's used in permaculture, which I studied, the whole idea of ways that you can speed up what's called natural succession. But you bring in pioneer plants and then you successively bring in other plants, and gradually you develop a mature forest environment. And what they're doing down there with the Milpa system is mimicking that in a way that works for that environment. These are all, what we really need to take away from people that are doing things like that is not the specifics, unless we happen to live in a nearly identical climate, but the concepts of what they're doing. We might not quite do a Milpa system the way they do it in Central America and the Amazon basin, but we can get the idea that we can do things to mimic natural succession and build an environment. And each step of the way, we're not waiting for long growing trees to come in that will take years before they produce. There's short-term plants that are part of this natural succession, like plants that introduce carbon, plants whose roots open up the soil, plants who help store various nutrients in the soil. All of those contribute, and they probably have the function of providing food, medicine, fiber, And then at the end of this period, you have something that's fairly self-maintaining.
What does natural succession mean?
It means if you take an example that more likely to be a group of people, but a herd of elephants goes through an area and just strips it bare, something more likely humans would do. Plants will begin growing there that can grow in that environment. You'll get, in the early stages, you'll get thistles, nitrogen fixers, short-lived, quick-growing plants that begin to re-establish biomass in the area. And then slowly but surely, they're replaced by longer-living plants and trees that will form a mature forest. I mean, I'm grossly oversimplifying, but it's a complex process for how nature restores land and restores forest to land. It might take hundreds of years naturally, and humans have learned through things like the Milpa system to speed it up while feeding themselves at the same time.
Nice. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say about permaculture, regenerative agriculture, your garden?
We started on this project. We came up here knowing we wanted to grow food, didn't know much about it. We also wanted to have flowers and all the things that everybody wants in a garden. And we started doing it, and we eventually met two people who are trained in permaculture, Wes and Margie, who've been pillars in this community. And they pretty much invited themselves. They said they'd like to come over and see what we were doing. So they came over and looked at our property. They said, oh, you're doing permaculture, and this is well on your way to building a food forest. Well, we had no idea. So they convinced us to go get the permaculture training course to sort of formalize what we were doing. And a big part of that course is the section on food forests. So we did, and it was very helpful. And using permaculture design principles is core to everything we do now. I've designed another food forest on the Mesa called Mesa Harmony Garden, which is a community project, and I've turned that over to other people. There's a whole community of people that work there. The food goes to the food bank to feed people who don't get healthy fruit in their diet much. And it's really been a great thing, and it's all comes out of permaculture, just an intelligent way of thinking about the landscape.
What are some of the principles of permaculture?
Let me think a second.
Sure.
That's a big question. Permaculture is a design system. It's a whole formal system for how you think about designing for sustainable or regenerative living. It looks at housing, at homes, at how we grow our food. People have even looked at factories and how factories are run to design them to be more sustainable. Like the guy I took my permaculture training from worked with a organic juice maker who was wasting all the pulp from after they squeezed the juice out. And he worked out a system where they composted it and sold it to local farmers, I believe, for high quality enriching of the soil. And previously that had just been going to the landfill. So that was a small example of permaculture. You look for natural ways of solving problems. When you look at a piece of land, you look at its contour. You think about how you can shape the land to hold more rainwater. You think about how you're going to plant it. People are thinking about natural building in permaculture, how you can build houses out of natural materials. So we have straw bale houses and other things like that that are end up building lovely houses. They have all the modern conveniences, but they're a much more sustainable way to live.
I think one thing you mentioned is transportation. If you keep the food in the community, there's less transportation needed, which can affect global warming and natural resources. Any thought about that?
Yeah, well, you want to keep the food in the neighborhood, and you want to have as little waste as possible ever leave the property or the neighborhood. The closer you can solve problems to home, the better. in fact, the closer you can do it small scale, 100,000 small scale food forests like this in this country would have real impact. So this is bigger than what we can do in one backyard. And also in permaculture, there's things you think about. How many uses can you get out of a plant or an animal for that means? But a plant can yield food, it can yield shade, it can drop leaves that are good for mulching, it can have firewood in it. There was an interesting thing that was done in Africa a few years ago in the edge of the Sahara where trees needed to be planted and protected, but they were getting cut down, and you couldn't be mad at the people who were cutting them down. They were desperate for firewood, for warmth and cooking food. They had no choice. But somebody got the bright idea of giving the local people pruning saws. So instead of cutting trees down, they pruned the wood they needed and the tree would regenerate. They got their firewood, they didn't have to kill the tree, and they had a source of trees. A lot of trees will really invigorate after a careful pruning. They'll just send tons of new growth out. So you're looking for ways in which what do they say in permaculture? The problem should become the solution. So the problem was people needed wood, and the solution was not stopping them from cutting wood down. They would have done it anyway. It was their land, their right. But helping them cut wood down in a way that produced more wood, not less.
By helping the growth of the plants?
Yeah, by helping the growth of the plants and leaving the plant, taking what they needed and leaving the rest behind for the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Do we have your permission to use this in the documentary?
You have
about
my
the
permission
forest
to use this in the documentary.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
And are you able to show me around some, or well, I'll just follow you out maybe and get a couple
in about
shots.
5-10
and maybe
minutes.
put the microphone box in your pocket, and I'll just follow you around, whatever you can show me.
Okay.
I'll just go handheld here. Okay, which way should
Right over here.
Okay, I'm gonna get this out of your way. I'll come back for my tripod.
Yeah, we can leave and leave you in. Actually, you can. If you need to stay a little longer in the garden, shoot more. Be my guest.
Okay, thank you.
So right where you say.
Okay, let me get on your other side here.
Yeah. So we say in permaculture you have to observe a lot. One of the things we've learned about Santa Barbara and Southern California is we have a lot of sunlight. So here's a little young apple tree growing what anybody back east would tell you is way too shady to grow fruit, and you certainly wouldn't get fruit. And there's the young apples. There's the young apples forming. It may not yield quite as much as a tree that's in full sun, but on the other hand, it'll yield, and this would be dead space in most gardens.
Okay, go ahead.
And right a few feet away is another apple tree growing in even denser shade. It's just leafing out, and it's almost too soon to see it, but it's got flower buds all over it.
You planted them, huh?
Yeah.
Where do you get your seeds?
Oh, these aren't planted from seeds. These are grafted trees.
Gotcha.
A lot of trees don't breed true from seeds. You don't know what you're going to get. So I think somebody is going to do a huge grow out like Johnny Chapman, known as Johnny Appleseed, did, where they grow thousands from seed and find which ones will work. Here's a peach tree where it's actually getting pretty good sun right here. This is, can't help it, fidget. We also have over 100 roses on this property. And aside from beauty and smell, roses are food. We eat the petals in salads. And some of the roses, some of the more bush ones in the front yard, we've discovered are great habitat for birds to build nests and be safe from predators. Their babies can hide in there among the thorny rose bushes. So we find a lot of birds' nests.
Is this a bird feeder up here?
Yeah, right now there's nothing in it, but we do feed birds. We really encourage birds. A woman who's a friend of ours calls them birds working birds. Birds eat a huge amount of insects a year. And yes, they eat a little bit of your fruit, but we found over the years observing the fruit predation from birds is not that great. And they're under a lot of stress, so we're happy for them to have a little bit of fruit.
So you're may I ask how old you are?
I'm 79.
79. And is it health producing to be out in the garden, would you
Oh
say?
yeah, well that's my wife's field really. She wrote a book over a decade ago called Ecotherapy, Healing with Nature in Mind. And she's doing a lot of work, as many people are now, on the healing benefits of nature, and they're real. I mean, there's good, solid scientific research backing it up. Oh, here's a rose that has a place in every garden that's growing fruit. It's called Julia Child.
Really?
Named that, and its petals are great in salad, which I'm sure Julia Child would be happy to hear. It's just getting ready to come into bloom. This is the last of our cherry trees to bloom. We grow about 5 or 6 cherry trees, and people didn't used to think you could grow cherries in Santa Barbara. But there's a lot of research going on now that we can learn from of varieties that will grow in warmer climates. These were all thought, even apples, people thought you could only grow apples in a cold climate. But it's turning out a lot of them do well in this climate.
Well, what's the tile doing here?
Oh, somebody had retiled the roof, and they didn't want to throw all the old tiles away. So we said, we'll take them, and we're using them for edging.
And does it help to confine the garden, or is it just
Well, we like
aesthetic?
to have a little structure to this garden. There's an aesthetic function to it. Unanticipated side benefit is lizards love to hide in here and then sun on the tiles. Lizards are another animal that eats a lot of insects. So they're our friends. We'll take all the lizards we can get. So we stick trees everywhere we can find a little hole. This is a feijoa or pineapple guava. Back there is a peach called Red Baron. And over it are some historic roses. The pink rose is called Bel Portuguese, and it's a huge rose. We keep it somewhat contained. And the other one is called Montecito. It's a rose that was developed locally.
Quite fragrant.
Yep. There's a lot of fragrance in this garden. There's a lot of beauty benefits from a garden like this without even trying.
I hadn't thought about the beauty of smells.
Yeah. And everywhere you look, there's pomegranates and various other fruit trees. This is because it's close to the kitchen, which is sort of a permaculture design idea. We have all our herbs and in there a lot of our annual vegetables. And it's easy to get.
Excellent.
Nasturtium, most people think of as just a flower, but the leaves and the petals are all edible. It's a relative It's a brassica, so it's related to cabbage and mustard and all the members of the brassica family. There's just a lot of, oh, and then this is some of our eclecticism. This is called, it's not the scientific name, but this is called New Zealand spinach, and it was part of the Maori diet. It's a plant native to New Zealand. It isn't spinach, it just looks a little like it and tastes like it. So what Europeans did is they gave their names to these plants. We wish the original names would be brought back more.
Nice.
So I should probably...
Okay, well, thank you so much. Any parting word? Keep on gardening or anything?
My parting words would be keep on gardening if you are, and if you aren't, start it. And as long as you're gardening, grow some food.
Thanks so much. I really
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
Bye.